Okay, so welcome to video 5 in making my first video game using Unreal Engine 5. In this video, I'm going to start out by filling out more of the village with props and foliage and rocks. I'm also going to work a little bit on my hidden grotto. I'm going to add some more of my collectible orbs around the map. I'm also going to finally fix my master landscape material issues that I've talked about in my previous video. I also add a sound cue for some sound effects. I work with dropping rocks in place using gravity and physics. And then lastly, I add a stairway to the start point. So here I'm starting out by reusing that rock wall that I used in the last video. I kind of started to build out kind of a little path in the forest behind these houses, and I'm going to use it here now to sort of build up kind of like a stony foundation for these houses here. You can see kind of in the background in a previous video I used some kind of like pre-made house mega scans. But that pack also came with kind of like a kit of parts, or you can make your own. And I think for these few houses, I'm going to try doing the kit of parts rather than just reusing the pre-made houses. I think it only came with like 2 pre-made houses. There's kind of one there off to the right, and then there's one kind of behind this house that you can't see here. But yeah, I think I'll try to use the kit of parts and kind of create some variety here with these homes. So just starting out with these rocky walls and making this kind of rocky foundation so that it looks like this house is kind of propped up off the main ground level. And that's one of those pre-made house meshes, and I think I'm just going to kind of detail it a little bit more by adding some props to the scene and make it kind of look a little bit more lived in. Here you can see me trying to grab those logs, and then I realize, oh yeah, duh, that's part of the landscape material kind of generates those logs. So I can't grab them, but I'm gonna move the little wheelbarrow over here and just kind of make it feel a little bit more lived in. I added those barrels last time. I'll probably add a few more things here if I can find them. I added some rocks there. I'm not sure if I like those, but it's just playing with it. It'd be nice if I could find kind of like a carriage. I'm not sure. The other thing I was thinking about too that I would like to add to my level, at least in the village, maybe throughout, is like animated animals. So maybe some animated birds flying above, some chickens walking around, maybe some butterflies in the field. So I'm not sure how, I'm not even sure how you would make that. That's like way above my my skill level at this point. So I would probably just go and look at some packs on the Fab website to see if there's some animated animals. I'm sure there are. And I might end up just doing that just to add to the ambiance. Overall, I just want this level to feel like you're interacting with nature. So you've got the movement of the plants and the grasses and the trees, and then you're kind of just walking around, you're listening to the sound effects, you've got the day-night cycle going above you. I think I will probably add in the weather system that goes with the ultra dynamic sky, so that there's kind of a variety, maybe between fog and rain, like a light drizzle maybe. I'm not sure yet. I think I will. And then I've added some kind of kickable rocks and stuff along the paths and stuff. So I just want it to feel a little bit immersive, kind of just like a nature collection sound effect vibe. So here I decided to jump back to my hidden grotto there in the middle. It's kind of that mound there in the middle. I had this idea that maybe there would be kind of like an old castle ruin or something sitting on top to help with disguising it and make it look like it was just kind of like a built-up old castle or something. So I found these pillars here that I have selected on the screen on Quixel Bridge, and I was going to start to lay them out in a square, and you'll see here in a minute. I actually kind of liked how it looked, but then I realized that they don't have a back side, which is kind of the downside with some of these Megascans, is they don't have back sides. They're not like four-sided. So this pillar would be great up against kind of a wall where you can't see behind it, but not right here out in the open. So I end up abandoning this here in a second, and I move these to another part of the map, kind of closer to the village. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how everything is turning out. Like this view right here, I love it. And I think it's kind of exactly what I was envisioning when I first set out to start this build, this game. And I'm really happy with how everything's turning out. I'm kind of loosely basing my village style and kind of like the mossy rocks and kind of ruin walls and kind of like the Tudor style houses and stuff. Like, as if this is kind of just like an old town in Ireland in like the 1700s or something like that. So that's kind of like the feeling that I want for this. there's still a lot of things that I have to think about in terms of like how many collectibles I want to have. I think I might do a variety of orbs, mushrooms, flowers, maybe something else, maybe some gold coins or something that are hidden. I even had this idea that maybe there would be some kind of portal that you have to have a key to unlock. So I'm not sure how far I want to take it. I kind of just started out with the vision of this would be kind of a cozy collectible game, environmental, walk around, like you're outdoors or something. But as I'm working on it, the ideas are coming to me and it's kind of growing. I just want to make sure that I don't grow the scope so much that I don't ever finish this game and I keep adding to it and adding layers of complication to it that make it hard for me to finish. I've mentioned this before, but I think that's one of the most important things about being a first-time game dev is sticking to your initial plan, because as you work on it, you start to get more and more ideas and there's more new things that you want to try and do. And if I do this again, which I think I will after I'm done with this game, but if I do this again, I want to make sure I have I can save some ideas for another game, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't have to cram everything into this, and so I want to be careful about not forcing ideas and things into this game just because I thought of it, if they don't really fit what this game is. So I don't know if finding keys and portals and that kind of stuff makes sense for this. I think maybe I'll just stick to the collectibles and just the environmental kind of walk, relaxation vibes and just leave it at that. But it's kind of hard to rein yourself in, because the more you learn, the more exciting it gets to kind of do stuff, and the more pleased you are with yourself. And you're like, hey, wait, I was able to figure out how to do that. Now could I figure out how to do this next thing? And so, yeah, it can be hard to stay on task if you're not careful. So I think I'm going to add some stairs here where there's some elevation changes, grade changes. These houses are set a little bit higher off the main path. The reason I did that was I was thinking, this path through the village over time, over the many years and decades, maybe even centuries, is going to get worn down, and at some point in time probably going to start to get a little lower than these houses. And then, it's probable that these houses were built higher on the sides on purpose, so that if there's any flooding or any water issues or anything like that, they're kind of set up off the ground from this muddy, what could be a muddy situation if there's rain and stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, well, there's probably going to be steps into these homes. And so that's kind of where my thought process comes with all of this stuff. Is it historically, architecturally accurate to put these types of stone steps with these types of houses and this kind of orientation? Who knows? That's like, I don't think you need to get that deep into a game build. I mean, unless you want it to be kind of like a history lesson and you're actually trying to recreate something that actually existed, or or, you know, was in the past. I don't think you need to care that deeply. I think it's just more about kind of layering and creating a story, and that story can be whatever you want it to be. So in my story, this is a sleepy little town kind of tucked away underneath this rocky overhang. They kind of live on the edge of this little forest on the outskirts of a large castle on this kind of floating island in the sky, and there's other floating islands. How they connect to each other, I don't know yet. Maybe there's bridges, maybe there's portals, I don't know. And maybe each of those islands, those floating islands in the sky, like I said in one of my previous videos, you know, if this game does well enough, I might do a follow-up to it where I develop one of those other floating islands and kind of connect the two somehow. But anyway, it could be that each of those islands has like a different, you know, style of architecture or environment or whatever. So I think it's just about telling a story, and you get to decide what that story is. So like this little cottage here, I imagine it's just like a sleepy little couple that, who knows, maybe they work at the castle and this is her little flower garden or whatever. So I think that's kind of where the inspiration comes. I'm not looking at any kind of like reference images. I'm not looking at like, hey, what did a garden and a house look like in the 1700s in Ireland? It's just more of like, when I went to Ireland, this is what I saw, and this is kind of what is reminding me of what I saw, and this is what I like. It's aesthetically pleasing to me, and I think this is just what my story is. So I don't think you have to like overanalyze and overly develop a story unless you're just like a master storyteller, which is going to be not many of us. And when I'm saying master storyteller, I'm talking like a Hideo Kojima, where he's developed like 50 different characters and they all have storylines of their own throughout the entire Metal Gear series or something. That's where you would get into like that level of detail. But something like this, that's like way overkill. And I think the reason I'm saying all of this is if you're not coming up from a creative background, but you would like to get into video game dev and you're not even sure where to start or how to tell a story or how detailed to get with some of the stuff, that's the only reason why I'm kind of bringing this stuff up, because it could be overwhelming and daunting. It occurred to me because I'm in a pretty artistic field professionally for my job, but I realize there's probably a lot of people that are highly technically experienced or smarter than I am when it comes to the technical side of stuff, but maybe they're not as maybe the creative side of stuff is not as easy. Anyway, hopefully that made sense. I feel like I'm rambling again. I get off on these tangents, but yeah, so here I kind of bounced back to my hidden grotto here, and I'm trying to really just layer the plants and the trees and the bushes and kind of make it curve around that rocky outcropping so that it just really helps look like it's overgrown and hidden. So like if you're walking by it, as somebody who has not seen these videos and hasn't played the game yet, I don't want there to be any indication that you could walk back here, and I'm hopeful that it's just kind of like this random little secret space that some people try to walk in and find out that there is like a little pot of gold or something underneath here.
Moving side to side, electronic Abstract feelings never sleep. Neon dreams in color steam. Neon gallery come alive. Sparks are dancing in the sky. Electric colors in my eyes. Feel the beat, the night is wild. Lots of beats that cutting through. Every hue of vivid blue. Digital art in pixels true. Creatures glowing neon hues. Lost in shadows cool and deep. Echoes of the night we keep. Abstract feelings never sleep. Neon dreams in color steep. Neon gallery come alive. Sparks are dancing in the sky. Electric colors in my eyes. Feel the beat, the night is wild.
So right here, I'm kind of looking at that trail through the forest as it walks along the edge of that gorge. And I'm going to add in this Megascan here. It's kind of like the base of a hill or a base of a mountain type of Megascan. So it kind of has a little bit of like washout at the bottom. You can see there, and it's got some rocks and stuff. So I'm just pulling that in here and there. I'm not overusing these. I just kind of pull them in every once in a while just to add a little bit of variety and stuff, but I don't think you have to really overuse these. I think if you have a really good master landscape material like this one, again, I'm using the one that came with the Brushify pack that I purchased, and it came with like 11 different materials pre-set up in it. I think if you're using a really good landscape material and then you're kind of just working with the landscape contours and just kind of adding a lot of highs and lows and variety and stuff, you don't really have to use a ton of these Megascans. I mean, I used a bunch of them near the village to create that kind of rocky outcropping and stuff, and I'll use them once I get into the cave and stuff, but on these flat parts you don't really have to overdo it. I'm kind of just putting them here and there where I think it makes sense. And so every so often I kind of stop, get low to the ground with the camera, and kind of look at what the elevations are doing on the grade. The grade being the ground, the landscape. Sorry, I'm using like civil engineering terms, and people might not know what that is. So I get the camera low to the ground, and I look and see what the ground is doing. And sometimes there's just a little bit too many highs and lows, like right here, that don't make sense. Like if this is a well-traveled pathway or little road or whatever, there's not going to be like crazy like bumps like that. It's going to be worn down over time. And imagine if you're just logically thinking, if you're walking on this with, or you're coming down it with like a horse and carriage or something like that, those are going to be crazy like speed bumps. So it makes more sense that these would have been leveled out and kind of flattened out over time. So I'm kind of just going through and flattening out the bits that are sticking up too high. Usually I kind of start sculpting the landscape with a rough idea, kind of where I want my highs and lows to be, where I want my little hills and cliffs and things like that to be, my ponds or rivers. And then I kind of just, as I work on my build, every now and then stop and look at them and kind of adjust it as I work through the level. And I'll probably keep doing this until the very end of the game as I'm focusing on different areas. Right there, what you're seeing me do is paint on one of the other materials that came with that master landscape material. This is like a muddy puddle material. And so I was just adding it there. Again, I'm not trying to overuse that one. I just want it to look like the water is kind of collected in certain spots on the map after it's maybe rained or something like that. And yeah, I'm just kind of over here on the pond area and adding it here. Maybe this pond fills up after a heavy rain, and then it starts to recede and it leaves behind those little muddy puddle textures. So right here you can see that landscape area that I've been having issues with. It's got the checkered texture, and I mentioned in my last video that I thought that maybe it's because there's just way too many materials coming in with that master landscape material. So here in a little bit I do figure out how to fix it, and I think I was right because I end up deleting a couple of those materials, and you'll see that here in a bit, and it seems to fix the problem. So here at my pond, I was calling it a lake before, but really it's a pond. It's a large pond. What I'm doing is I copied like 5 or 6 of my collectible orbs in a bunch, and I'm just copying them all over the pond. I'm eventually going to fill the whole level out with these things, because that is the whole point of the game, is just to collect these things. So that's what you see me doing here, is I'm kind of just copying and pasting them all over. I'm sure there's a much easier way to do this with like a paintbrush style or, procedural type of thing. But, to me, this is a small enough level and a small enough build. There's not a whole lot else to it. So I don't mind hand placing these things. I kind of enjoy it, and I find it a little bit relaxing. I'm sure it's going to add an extra hour or two to my overall completion time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal, and I kind of enjoy kind of hand placing them and seeing how it lays out, see if I like it. Like right here, I kind of stopped to see, are they the right height? Can my player walk into them without them being too high or too low? So this is just my process. You probably wouldn't want to do this on a much bigger game that has a lot more scope and stuff. Right there, I walked through those rocks, so I need to set a collision mesh on those. But anyway, my point is, just because I'm doing it like this doesn't mean that there's not other ways to do it, or that it's necessarily even the best way to do it. That's just the way that I find enjoyable, and that makes sense for me. And I do think there's benefit in me saying that, because like I said, if you're watching videos and tutorials of game devs who have been doing this a lot longer and have all the tips and tricks and tools and stuff, it can be kind of discouraging or even overwhelming if you don't know all those things yet. And I just think that progress, however it's made, is better than spending, days and hours trying to research how to do these things perfectly when you could just do it. In general, in my experience with game dev so far, and also just in my career, is more often than not you end up learning a lot more just by doing it the hard way, doing it the long way, and then you realize and you learn through different things, through people telling you on your comment section or whatever, how there's an easier way to do it, and you kind of just grow your tool set, your skill set over time. So here I'm kind of walking underneath that grotto. I want there to be just like a faint dim light under there, where if you're walking by it doesn't really stand out, and maybe it even just looks like it's like the hint of a moonlight kind of shining down there. And then I just want it to look like there's gold coins in there that are glowing. I still need to work on the lighting in there, but I'll go back to that at another point. But I really, really love how these orbs look as they glow, just kind of hovering over the lake, and the reflection that they create on the lake. Yeah, like right there, it's so pretty and ethereal. This is exactly what I had imagined in my mind when I set out to make this game. But you can kind of see how they reflect off the surface of the pond water and stuff, and I really love how it's turning out, and I'm really happy that I made those orbs kind of more of like a pinkish purple color. Okay, so here's where I finally figure out how to fix this dreaded checkerboard pattern. So I'm going to go to my landscape paint, and then right here is that big long drop down list of all the materials that come as part of that Brushify master material. So I'm kind of looking through it, and I'm just trying to decide which materials I can do without. I decided I don't need the snow. This is not going to be a snowy level, so I can eliminate that one. And then I end up getting rid of the dead grass one as well. So this one took me a minute to figure out, and again, this was just me kind of trying to guess. The checkerboard thing happened when I started to add a new material, and so I figured maybe if I just eliminate a material, it'll have the opposite effect. And here I'm just kind of trying to hover over to figure out how to do this. And a lot of this is trial and error. I mean, I googled the heck out of this thing trying to figure out how to fix this, and it was just a matter of like watching a number of YouTube videos. None of them helped. A lot of them were saying to set your material to wrap, which I had already done. Some of them were saying to change the resolution or quality of your textures, which I did, and that didn't fix it either. Some of them said to regenerate your world partition. I tried that. It didn't fix it. And then I happened to stumble upon a Reddit post by somebody, and they just made a comment like, maybe there's too many materials in your master material. And that kind of just tipped me off to come back here and see if, what would happen if I delete a couple of these materials. And ultimately that helped, so I'm assuming that was the issue, is that maybe there's just a point where there's so many materials that Unreal can't figure out how to blend them, and it just becomes overwhelmed and can't figure it out. So I end up deleting the dead grass material, and I think it's not a deletion, like it'll still show up in the list here, but what I did is I cleared it from the level, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, it kind of cut off here, but you can see right there. When I click that, it ends up fixing it, and you can see how automatically that landscape material there is generated, and it didn't fix it on the other part there. So interestingly enough, if I clear this other one, which is the snow layer, it ends up fixing that other part. Let's see, I think I have to like zoom over there. And then I think I deleted another one, or else I regenerated it or rebuilt. Let's see. Sorry guys, I'm like voiceovering this as there we go. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just, like I said, is there a right or wrong way to do things? Of course. Is there better ways to do things? Sure. But a lot of it's just trial and error and just trying to figure stuff out on your own. And a lot of times there's a lot of quirks and random things that you run into, and there's no real straightforward answers. But hey, I fixed it. So here I'm jumping back to my pond. I'm going through and kind of just walking through it and seeing if there's any deep spots or parts where my character is drowning or sinking. I just want this water at most to be like waist deep. So I'm kind of lifting these rocks here that you walk on. And then here in a second, I add a collision mesh to one of the rocks that I still needed to add it to because I was walking through the rock, which we obviously don't want. One thing that I noted when I've kind of been on Reddit and kind of Googling things on forums and stuff like that is to be careful to use the complex mesh as your collision, because I guess it's quote unquote expensive in terms of resources. And that was the first time I had heard it worded like that. So I guess ultimately what it is you have to be cautious with how many megascans and meshes and stuff where you're using complex geometry as your collision mesh, because it makes the engine work harder, or it uses more resources to render and stuff. I'm sure I explained that all wonky, and somebody could explain that much better than me, but I guess going back and looking at everything, there's probably where you can, when it comes, yeah, see in there I hadn't fixed it yet, I still needed to fix that. Where it makes sense and where you can use simple collision meshes. So that is a box, a capsule, or a sphere. When you're using the geometry of this element here, I guess it just makes it a lot more hefty in terms of the size of the model and the size of the level and what has to be rendered and stuff like that. Hopefully I'm understanding that correctly, because like I said, that was the first time I had heard it worded that way, where it is quote unquote expensive when it comes to resources for the engine. So that was news to me. So looking back on it, I'm like, okay, there might be a few objects and stuff that I could go back and fix to have a more simple collision mesh. It's kind of hard though with some of these bits, especially like the rocks and these like earthy pieces and stuff, because they have not simple geometry. So if I were to put a box on that, when your player walks over it, there'd be corners where it looks like your player's kind of hovering over the air, if that makes sense. So anyway, let me switch gears here. What I'm going to do here is add a sound cue. I'd like to add the sound of frogs in my lake. So what I did is I dropped my sound effect in from, I have a whole folder of sound effects, and I drag and dropped it in here. And then what I'm going to do is right click, audio, create sound cue. You can see me looking for it here. I don't know what I was thinking. I was kind of tired when I was filming this video. So you see I'm a little bit confused right here. Let's see. Right click, audio, sound cue. There we go. So I just named it, I think, frogs. And then what you're going to do is you're going to open your sound cue, make your box a little smaller, go back to your content browser, and you're just going to drag and drop that sound effect. So for me, it's that frog sound effect, and you're just going to drag and drop it in here. And then what I like to do is right click and create a looping node, and I plug my sound effect into my looping, and then my looping into the little speaker. And the looping just makes sure that it plays over and over and over again. And sound cues are pretty easy to work with so far that I've found. These are going to be more for sound effects and like background music and stuff, but you can change the pitch of it. You can make them high pitch, low pitch. You can change the frequency of how it's looped. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward for the most part. And so once I get this set up here in a second, I'll let you hear the sound effect once I place it in the level. So once you get your sound cue set up the way you want it, and you can always go back and edit it if you like, all you have to do is get your content browser and drag and drop it into place. Make sure you're in the area of the map that you actually want that sound effect. So here you can see it just drags and drops in, just the way like a light or like an ultra dynamic sky little node thing pops up. What I like to do once I place it is I like to set up attenuation volume, and this gives you an inner and outer radius. And what I like about this is your inner radius is going to be where the sound effect is the loudest, and then your outer radius is going to be as it kind of dims. And that kind of just gives you more of like a realistic sound effect while you're playing the game. So like as you're walking closer to the pond, on the outskirts, the frogs are going to be a little bit more faint of a sound, and then as you walk closer and closer to the pond toward the center of it, they're going to be a lot louder. So it gives you a little bit more of like a spatial, like 3D sound effect to these sound cues. And I really love how this is sounding. The frogs really give it that extra really cool environmental feel. I'll probably add crickets as well. I think I might need to find a better water sound for this pond. The sound that I have in here is a little bit more for like a stream. And then the other thing I need to do is connect a kind of sloshing through water sound effect to the actor or the player or your mannequin, I guess. I always get those three mixed up. As you're walking through the pond. That's going to be a little bit more complicated, so I haven't figured out how to do that yet. But I think I probably want to do that just to give it that extra layer of realism and sound effect. So here I'm going to adjust the height of the bottom of the pond in this area. I know it seems weird that there's grass in here, but like I said, this is kind of a pond, and my idea is that maybe this kind of just fills up with water after a heavy rainstorm. So in reality, there would be grass here growing, since it would be kind of a wet, kind of moist environment. So sorry, I hate I hate using that word moist. It's such a gross word. But anyway, so I don't want this to be super deep. I just want it to be like ankle, at most waist deep, so that like normally this would just be kind of like a little puddles of water maybe, and there would be a lawn or kind of like a grass meadowy thing growing here, and then maybe these like lily pads and stuff show up after a heavy rain and the water's just been sitting in here for like a week or so. So that's kind of more the vibe that I want. So I'm thinking to not make it as deep as it was. That's why I'm kind of bringing the level up a little bit. And I'm thinking of like, you know, I want these kind of like areas where you can like walk out into the middle of the pond on this dry land and kind of connect them with like these little land bridges and stuff. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. So in my last video, I mentioned that in this video, I would be experimenting with playing with physics and gravity to place my rocks rather than hand placing them. So here I'm just doing some tests. I'm putting kind of like a generic cube as well as like a Megascan rock mesh up in the air. And you'll see me playing with this here for a while. And I ran into a few issues. Ultimately, what I found was I kept getting this error with the rock. I could get the gravity and the physics to work with the cube so that as soon as you enter a simulation mode, the cube will fall to the ground. But the rock, for one, it wasn't falling. For two, once I messed with its collision mesh and stuff, it was falling through the ground. And then I was getting an error that Unreal Engine 5 was trying to generate the physics. There you can see the cube dropping, so that works great with the cube. I was getting this error that the engine was failing to simulate the physics movement on the rock. So it took me a lot of back and forth. I tinkered with this for a while. Ultimately, what I found was apparently there's a known bug with Unreal Engine 5 where you cannot have the setting set right here off to the right. You cannot have this set to use complex collision as simple. For whatever reason, the engine can't work with that. It can't figure out the physics of it. And this took me a lot of back and forth. And ultimately ended up working, and I'll kind of just leave this up on the screen and let this play so you can kind of see me tinkering with it, but I'll get to the point now so you know what happened. But ultimately, what ended up working for me the best was just to set and you can see that error right there. And it just has an issue with generating the physics on it. And I tried it a different way on the next one, and that's when you can see the rock, it'll just fall straight through the ground. There's a few things that I ended up learning on this. Number one, for physics and gravity to work, you have to set your collision meshes up first on your object. So if you do not have a collision mesh on, say, that rock or that box or whatever that's in the air, they're not going to fall. And they're not going to... And you also have to have the collision set up with your landscape as well to block. Otherwise, nothing will... It just won't work. So the second thing is, like I said, it doesn't work with use complex collision as simple. The engine has a hard time trying to figure out what to do with it for whatever reason. I guess it's a known bug from what I read on different forums and stuff. Ultimately, what ended up working for me was, in this case, because these are going to be rocks that are going to just be kind of in the landscape and a little bit smaller, that my player is not necessarily going to be walking on top of, what I ended up landing on was just adding a simple capsule form collision sphere around the rock, and it worked good. That was the best way to make it work. And yeah, I'll leave this whole trial and error process up on the screen. This takes maybe like 10 minutes or something, and you can kind of see the different settings and things that I messed with, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to work, but ultimately that's what I went with, and it's fine for what I wanted. So the whole point of me messing with placing rocks with physics and gravity was, I mentioned in my last video, I don't necessarily love the look of hand placing all of these large boulders and rocks and stuff around the landscape, because there's kind of like a curated feel to it. And my idea was, what if I get a collection of rocks, a bunch of rocks, put them all up in the air, set it to physics and gravity, simulate it, let the rocks fall wherever they fall naturally, and then take off the physics so that they just stay in place after I've simulated that fall. That didn't work, and you'll see that here in a second. For one, it didn't work because after I would simulate it and they would fall into place, I would select all of them and turn physics off, thinking that they would just stay there. But then when I would get out of my simulation, they would be back in the air where I had them before. So I'm sure there's an easy fix for that. I couldn't figure it out though, and I had tinkered with this for a while and I got kind of tired of it. The other problem is you have to mess with the actual mass of the rock and the actual physics of the rock. So like how far it moves, how far it bounces, how much inertia and stuff it has. Like that kind of sounds silly, but really that is like how these things work with these settings and stuff. And I haven't messed enough with the physics and stuff to know which settings to tinker with. I did eventually figure out that once I made these smaller, like kickable size, that would just be kind of laying in the middle of the road and stuff. If I gave them more mass, when my player walks over and kicks the rock, it doesn't go as far and it kind of tumbles a little bit more slowly. So that was one thing, was giving it more mass. So, because otherwise you'll see kind of when I simulate these rocks will bounce and go flying, and if you barely kick it, it'll just keep rolling and tumbling for a very long time, and it'll go super far, like it's bouncy, like it's a bouncy ball. So part of what I found that fixes it is giving it more mass, but there were some other things I needed to mess with, and I just kind of got tired of tinkering with it because I was getting tired. But I might go back and try this again and see if there's a way to do what I was trying to do, which is to put like a bundle of rocks in the air, simulate the physics to let them fall, and then somehow pin them in place so that they stay there. There's just something a little bit more natural looking about the placement of a grouping of rocks. You can see right there when I simulated that how my rock goes straight through the ground. I might put a little caption in here and replay that so you can see that, because I was talking over that. So right here, I decide I'm just going to put a simple capsule collision sphere around my rock and just kind of scale it down and get it as tight to the rock as I possibly can. And then you'll see what happens when I simulate the physics on it after I reload it back in. So I'm kind of just adjusting my capsule. You can see it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be sticking out a little further on some parts of the rock and sticking into the rock on other parts. If this was a bigger boulder that you could walk up on, that would be a problem. But because these are going to be smaller and kind of more landscapey rocks, it's not that big of a deal. And then after learning that let me simulate it and you'll see here that it works now. Kind of bounces and kind of lands and it stays there. That's exactly what I wanted. So now that I figured that out, I end up copying a bunch of rocks over there and trying to do what I said before, which is to create like a little bundle of rocks and drop them into place. And you'll see that some of them are a little too bouncy and they go a little bit too far. This right here, I'm just checking some of these meshes. Some of these meshes are not four-sided, so that doesn't have a bottom, so I'm not going to use that one. I'm only going to be using rocks that have four sides, if that makes sense. This one has no bottom, so that's a no. And that's kind of what I'm doing now, is just kind of looking at the different rocks I have. So these ones I'll use since they are four-sided, and you'll see me scale them down and make a little bunch over there, and you'll see what happens when I drop them.
Neon dreams in color steam. Neon gallery come alive. Sparks are dancing in the sky. Electric.
So here I've got my bunch of rocks and I'm going to simulate, and then they're going to go all over. They don't even create a pile. And that's not bad, but that's not what I was looking for. And you can see how that one just keeps rolling, and they kind of have a lot of movement. They keep going and going. That was not the look that I was going for. So then I realized, okay, maybe they're too high. Maybe I'm dropping them from too high of an elevation, and maybe I need to drop them a little bit closer to the ground. So here I'm just going to collect them all and move them down and simulate the drop again. It looks a little bit better, but it still doesn't give me the look that I was hoping and going for. So here I'm about to simulate it from a lower spot. It's hard to kind of tell because whenever it simulates, it's simulating at nighttime, but you can see him there kind of tumbling and rolling around. Again, not bad, but not what I was looking for. I just want it to kind of look like a little pile of rocks that has naturally just fallen off that big chunk of rock there over time and just kind of collected along the base. So it's at this point that I realize, okay, maybe I need to give them more mass. Maybe I need to work with like the linear and angular dampening. Yeah, they're off to the right under the physics tab. But anyway, so I kind of mess with this for a while, but like with other things, if I don't have it figured out right away, if I'm not making enough progress with it, I just kind of leave it on my list, my mental to-do list of things that I need to go back and work on. In the grand scheme of things, I kind of prioritize figuring these things out based on how much is this actually going to affect the final playability of the game. Is this little pile of rocks matter in the grand scheme of things? Not as much as it matters that I get my sound cues right, not as much as it matters that I get my collectibles right and my sound effects and the lighting and the other stuff. So that's why I'm not spending a whole ton of time trying to figure these things out right now, and I'm kind of saving them till later. I'm kind of looking at big picture and then kind of fine-tuning as I go along, and I'm saving the less important things to be figured out later on. So as I was working on those physics and gravity rock placement for those larger rocks, I thought to myself, well, it might be kind of nice to put some really small, kind of pebble size, tinier rocks along the pathway at different places. Not everywhere, but in certain spots, so that as your character is walking along, they kind of kick these rocks and these rocks have some movement. These are kind of like the little fine-tuning things that don't occur to you or that you even think about when you first have an idea for a game and when you first start working on a build, but that kind of occur to you as you're working on it and you're working on these different things. You kind of get ideas. And so this is not something I thought about at all, but like I said, as I was working on those rock physics, I thought it'd be kind of nice to have these along the pathway. It'll add kind of another sense of realism. It kind of gives you the feeling that you are engaging with nature. And so I thought, well, let me place these in various places so that you're kind of kicking rocks as you're going. And even over here, set some of these to have physics so that you can kind of kick them and they move around a little bit, like right there. And I really like that. So I'll probably place those in various piles and random places around the entire map. And again, those are kind of like the happy little things that happen as you're working on a game that you don't think of initially, especially as a first-time game dev. These are not things that you're thinking about at all. You're just thinking about, how do I build this? How do I start? How do I add in, a Niagara system? How do I make a collectible? But as you learn more, you kind of get these cool ideas and you kind of add layers of detail and interest to the game kind of naturally as you're working on it. And that's kind of cool. So at this point in time, I'm noticing now that when I do playthroughs, when I get into the village area, the game starts to get a little laggy. And the only thing I can think of is that maybe that large mesh, that mega scan for that big house there, is slowing it down. And maybe it's just, this area is just like a little resource heavy. So I'm going to have to figure out a way, if there's a way to get that mesh kind of a smaller size. Maybe it's a matter of kind of lowering the quality of the render material. Maybe it has to do with my world partitions. I'm going to have to start looking into that the more that I fill my entire level out with meshes and megascans and foliage and all of that stuff, because I'm still nowhere near done. I still have a lot of areas left on the map to finish filling out. And so I wonder if at some point in time it's going to make sense to go back and adjust my world partition system, or like I said, maybe on things that are less important, bring down the quality of the materials and textures. So I'm going to give a little love and attention to my start point. So I want my start point to look like I'm coming out of these big double doors and this staircase that leads out of this kind of castle or something. I'm not sure if I'm going to build a faux castle behind these walls that you can see. I probably will, just so that it makes sense visually, so it doesn't look like you're just coming from doors from outer space. But anyway, that's besides the point. So I decide that it's time to pull in some stairs. I think these were part of maybe a Japanese temple set or something like that on Quixelbridge, which is now Fab. And anyway, I'm adding kind of a simple collision to them. I could use the complex mesh, which is actually the actual shape of the staircase, but after reading that those use up a lot of resources or are quote unquote expensive in your game, I'm trying to minimize how many complex meshes that I'm using and just trying to limit those to actual complicated walkable surfaces like boulders and rocks and stuff. And anything else where it doesn't count as much, I'm just going to try to use basic collision meshes, which surprisingly works really well here. It kind of, as my character's going down, it's still giving the feeling of walking down steps. I know it's because I have those kind of generic steps in that checkerboard pattern there, and you'll see here what I do in a second is I kind of lower them below, or I push them down below my staircase, and you really can't tell still that this is like basically one big giant slope of a collision box that I added to those stairs, if that makes sense. When my character walks down it, it still kind of looks like she's walking down steps. So it's, you'll see here in a minute what I'm talking. Hopefully this is making sense. Here we go. So if I do like a play from here and I walk down, it should render like I'm going down a slope, because that's a little wonky there where my foot's sticking up. It should render like I'm just walking down a slope, but it doesn't. It looks like she's actually walking down steps, and it looks like she's walking up steps. So I'm not sure how that's possible when my simple collision is basically one slope of a box, but hey, I'm gonna stick with it and I'm happy with it. So, and I kind of want it to look like these are old steps, so it's kind of weathered, like maybe the ground is kind of eroding over it, and that's why there's some dirt and stuff hanging over. I'll probably add some boulders along the sides, maybe some lanterns, maybe a bench. I'm not sure yet. Those grid kind of placeholder walls there will eventually be castle walls, I think, and they'll just have growies and overhanging plants and stuff on them. One of the other levels of detail that will really help kind of fill everything out once I've got all of my meshes and everything in place is to go back in and add a lot of decals. Decals are a really easy way to add some detail to the scenes without being resource heavy, since they're 2D and they just kind of sit on the surface, but they make a huge difference. And there's a lot of different decals that work really well. There's like dirt decals and leaf decals and just all sorts of different stuff. So that'll be something I do more toward the end once I've got all of my meshes and foliage and everything in place and where I want it. But yeah, there's still that I need to do as well.
Lights are flashing blue and red. Neon dreams inside my head. Pieces pounding through the floor. Feel the beat, I want some more. Paintings moving side to side. Electronic dreams collide. Canvas breathing life inside. Glowing bright like city lights. Paintings moving side to side. Electronic dreams collide. Canvas breathing life inside. Glowing bright like city lights. Neon gallery come alive. Sparks are dancing in the sky. Electric colors in my eyes. Feel the beat, the night is wild. Laser beams, they're cutting through. Every hue a vivid blue. Digital art in pixels true. Creatures glowing neon hues. Lost in shadows cool and deep. Echoes of the night we keep. Abstract.
So back at the pond, I'm gonna keep working on leveling that pond out and kind of making the bottom of it a tad higher so that the character's not drowning. And then I'm also gonna work on adding some materials in here. I like, when I work on the water's edge, I like to make it look like there's little areas where the water's kind of eaten away at the earth and kind of created these little nooks and crannies and stuff. So it's not just like one harsh straight edge as it goes around. So it looks a little bit more natural looking. And I also want to add some different materials along the base of this pond. So like I mentioned, I'm thinking this is just an area that kind of fills up with water after a heavy rain. So I do want some grass, but that grass would be kind of at the higher parts around the edges. I want the bottom of the pond that is theoretically going to be filled with water more often to be more of like a sandy or muddy or like beachy kind of texture. That's like too sandy, so I end up going back and kind of going over that with some mud and stone and some other stuff. That's kind of like beach sand, so that looks cool, but it's not really, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for what this is. So anyway, I kind of just go back and forth and kind of layer these and paint with these. And you can change, if you look at the material list there's a little box underneath each material. You can make it a subtractive material blend. So you can kind of play with those. There's also an alpha brush that comes with the Brushify pack that's really nice, and you can brush with different types of brushes, different opacities, different brush strengths, and you can kind of just find what suits you for what you're trying to do. I kind of just mess with it and go back and forth and layer and undo and until I kind of like where it's at. I tend to just bring the brush size or the brush strength down a little bit and then the brush size up and the fall off a little higher so that it gives more of like a blendy effect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Ultimately, you're never really going to see the whole pond in its entirety from the sky. You're only going to be seeing it eye level from your character's playing viewpoint. So this doesn't have to be perfect. I just want it to kind of look semi-realistic in terms of like there wouldn't be a full lawn of grass growing at a bottom of a pond that's got water in it all the time. But it's very possible that the grass would be growing kind of up on those higher bits where maybe the pond just kind of flooded from a recent rain or something like that. So again, trying to follow some kind of logic so it has a level of realism, but it doesn't have to be perfect.
Lights are flashing blue and red. Neon dreams inside my head. Pieces pounding through the floor. Feel the beat, I want some more. Paintings moving side to side. Electronic dreams collide. Canvas breathing life inside. Glowing bright like city lights. Paintings moving side to side. Electronic dreams collide. Canvas breathing life inside. Glowing bright like city lights. Neon gallery come alive. Sparks are dancing in the sky. Electric colors in my eyes. Feel the beat, the night is wild. Laser beams, they're cutting through. Every hue a vivid blue. Digital art.
So we're coming up on an hour and 40 minutes on this video, and I think I'll probably wrap it up here. I think in the next video I'll make some more sound cues. I think I'll also paint with a foliage brush some more field flowers and maybe some rocks and sticks and stuff like that. I think I'll probably also add in a collectible flower, so that'll be like the second collectible that I work on in this map. I think there'll be probably 4 different collectibles, but I think my next collectible will be a flower. And then I might work on the water a little bit. I don't love how bright blue it is, so I might play with the colors of the water and just add in some more meshes, maybe work on the village a little bit more, start to build out some of those houses. And then, yeah, we'll just go from there. So if you made it this far, this is video 5. Thank you again for watching. I appreciate everybody's kind words and support, and I will see you on the next one.